Welcome back to the mainstream. John, how you going this week?
Hello, Dan. What's on Adelaide Watch this week?
Is that your favourite segment, Adelaide Watch?
No, it's my second favourite segment after our book segment.
After your book segment. Well, on Adelaide Watch, I mentioned last time that I went to Metallica, which I enjoyed, and then...
The heavy metal fan that you are.
I am, yeah. And then we got, this coming weekend, we've got AC/DC playing at the V8s.
Oh, wow. So you've got three huge events. You're going to AC/DC in the cars.
It was one or the other, so I chose Metallica this year, but next year it'll be...
Why do you hate Australia?
Cars. It'll be the Cars next year.
It's AC/DC.
So, yeah, I know, but I want to keep my memory of them from when I saw them 10 years ago when they last played, 12 years ago. That's the memory I want. So.
If they remember it. But you've missed out on...
We missed out on the biggest event.
The big one. $2 billion worth.
$2 billion conference.
United Nations Conference of the Parties on Climate Change is not coming to Adelaide.
Oh, I was disappointed, very disappointed. But I've loved the fact, so what happens when you have the V8s, the cars in Adelaide, is it goes through a lot of inner suburban streets, and the usual people complain about it, which I understand, because if you don't like the cars and you're having to deal with the traffic and the noise, I understand why they don't like it. I get it. But I didn't hear any of them complaining about the prospective traffic jams associated with all these people.
No, because that would have been saving the
overseas. So, no, we didn't get COP. We didn't get the COP conference. The $2 billion. How do you spend $2 billion on a conference?
You have a very big haul. But it was interesting, wasn't it? The Albanese government, I didn't sense, was fighting that hard to bring 100,000 public servants from around the world to talk about how we should deindustrialise.
No. Well, I think the debate's changing. People don't care in a way that they used to.
Well, the debate's changing because, of course, we've just had COP30 in Brazil, and it's basically passed without any much reference here in Australia. What I got most excited about, and this received a lot of publicity around the world, and we'll talk about it, was the deforestation of the Amazon that was required to host COP30 because the meeting was at a city in Brazil, Belém, which is on the Atlantic coast, which is where one of the areas where the Amazon flows out to, and to host the tens of thousands of people going to the meeting. As Donald Trump tweeted, they ripped, quote unquote, they ripped the hell out of the rainforest. And it was a story about how, to prepare for this COP meeting, upwards of 100,000 trees were destroyed to build a 4-lane, 13-kilometre highway. And the point was made, is this really the best way to save the planet? But then, of course, the mainstream media went into a panic because initially the story was covered by the BBC. They interviewed the head of the provincial government, who said, yes, this is a COP30 project. And then once this received worldwide publicity, all the fact-checked organisations had to say, well, no, they were going to build this road anyway, and it's near a power line, and it's nowhere near as big a deal as is made out, even though it was. And then, of course, all of these people said, well, maybe building roads for climate change conferences highlights, quote unquote, the authenticity gap between what we would like to do and what we do. And my favourite claim from the fact checkers was that, in fact, building a 4-lane, 13-kilometre highway is going to reduce carbon emissions because it will take people less time to travel on the road by car. Right. So we should build more roads to reduce carbon emissions.
There you go. There's a new argument. But I do think that people are getting over the climate change stuff now. We've had some polling that was released a couple of days ago, published in the Daily Telegraph, and I found this very interesting. So what it asks is basically, what are your top concerns as voters? What are the things you
care
about the most? The cost of living was number one. So this was from a polling firm called Spectre Strategy, and what it showed was immigration is now a greater concern or a bigger concern than climate change to Australian voters. So what it showed is that immigration is now the 4th highest concern for voters, while concern over climate change and the environment fell to 6th place. Cost of living and housing affordability were the top 2. So what's interesting about this is, firstly, they call it climate change and the environment as one category, but I can guarantee you, if you just had climate change as its own category without lumping in the environment, that would be much lower down the list, because the two are, I accept they're related, but they're also separate things. Like, you can care about environmental things like conservation, clean air, clean water, clean waterways, and things like that, which have nothing to do with climate change. In fact, one of the funny things or ironic things about the debate about climate change is it's subsumed any discussion about actual
About
real environmental issues that normal people actually care about.
You talk about feral animals or noxious weeds, and people say, "Oh, but it's climate change."
So Australians, I think Australians are pretty.
But it was interesting because I think it was in that article that the pollster talked about the fact that people are afraid to discuss immigration, and there's been, and this has been pointed out over the last few years, there's been the conspiracy of silence whereby we can't talk about levels, we can't talk about cohorts of people, and if we can't do that, and if we can't trust the public, then we're going to get the reaction against the politicians that we've been seeing.
And I think the other consequence of what you mentioned with the COP is obviously our friend Chris Bowen has been elevated to President of Negotiations for COP 31.
But isn't he also a federal minister of the
Well, not for long.
Apparently not.
Not for long. He's got to go. They're already backgrounding against him, so he's going to get moved on. So there was some reporting by Sharry Markson on Sky News saying that there's rumblings from the government that Chris Bowen be dubbed in favour of Andrew Charlton, who's the member for Parramatta. So I think what's going to happen is he will be dubbed in the new year. Chris Bowen will be dubbed. He'll go to the backbench. And I think he's probably going to retire from his seat by the end of this will be his last term.
So this means Tony Abbott runs in the McMahon by-election. At last, after a decade of people saying that your special guest on Australia's future has to come back, the author of Australia, A History, IPA distinguished fellow, we could be losing him back into politics. I mean, I had hoped and others had hoped that an Abbott-Bowen matchup in McMahon would have been one for the ages. I think as revealed by the election results, not even Tony Abbott could have won McMahon then, but maybe he could win that by-election. So you're going to put to him when he's next on the podcast, Tony, when are you running for McMahon?
I can only ask him that so many times, so I'll see. I've asked him about half a dozen times. So
we wear him down.
We'll wear him down on it. But this shows, so Chris Bowen's gone, right? If they're backgrounding against him, he's done.
Yeah.
And I think this shows that what is going to happen in the new year is that Labor is going to put a new person in as energy minister, and that's going to start the crab walking back of net zero. And they're not going to dump net zero, the words, but they will stop talking about it, and they will stop imposing a lot of the short-term restrictions, which is exactly what happened in the UK. So what you're seeing around the world is centre-right governments are just dumping net zero. Centre-left governments are just not talking about it anymore. So this is yet more evidence that we have won on net zero.
But I'm confused because I saw in The Guardian today or yesterday, quote unquote, experts reassure Australians that Bowen can do both jobs. So according to experts, he can be a federal minister and spend most of his time overseas.
Well, the other thing is he's also...
Which is probably a good thing, I've just realised. We want Bowen out of the country for as long as possible.
That's not a bad point. But the other thing is he's also a local member.
Yeah. Western Sydney, he's still got to do Tony Abbott country.
He's still got to do work as a local member.
Yeah.
So
how do the voters of McMahon feel about this?
We'll find out.
When is the IPA going into the field to do some polling in Western Sydney?
Well, we'll do that.
How do you feel about your local member spending his time in New York, London and Paris?
I'm not sure they'll be too keen on that. So, but no, that's good. Good news. So I think we're winning. We're winning on net zero, and we're getting there.
But but you've also now got the skeptics saying that 1 week after the Liberals apparently dump net zero, and we'll come back to what dumping net zero actually means, it hasn't been reflected in the poll. So they're saying hasn't this a pivot so-called to the right already failed?
Yeah. So if you look at the news poll, it's still got Labor up, 58-42. That's a lot. Two-party preferred.
That's more seats at the next election.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, they'd win more on those numbers. So the primary for Coalition is at 24. It was at 32 at the election. One Nation was at 15, Labor 36, Greens 13, others 12. So people say, dumping net zero hasn't worked. Well, firstly, you need more than 1 week. Secondly, to Susan Lee's credit, she was out there in a sort of de facto campaign, at least making the argument. But you've got half, or not maybe half, maybe I would say a third of the Liberal party room who's out there saying, oh, no, we still support net
You've
zero.
got coalition MPs saying this week net zero is still an aspiration. So have
still
the
support
Liberals
it. We can still
dumped
say it.
net zero or not? We're still in Paris, but we've dumped net zero, but it's still an aspiration.
Yeah.
So what's their policy?
I don't know. That's the problem. You cannot stand on both sides of the road. So, and this is the point that we've been making, is you've got to dump it, but then you've got to communicate it and campaign on it, and you can't have mixed messages.
And explain the alternative. And then they're saying, but we also like coal. Good. We want to keep coal-fired power stations operating. Good. But we want to stay in Paris. I think it's going to be a very difficult high wire act to manage, which is going to prove to be unsustainable. And the problem will be is that critics of the Liberals' position on net zero will say, see, it didn't work.
Yeah.
See, it didn't work. We have to continue moving to the left. And even today, you saw 3 or 4 journalists after the news poll discussion saying, well, the Liberals must win teal seats. Well, okay, there's 7 or 8 teal seats to win, fine. But where do you get the other 20 seats to form government?
Well, like we've said before, they need something like 25 seats, even if they win all the teal seats, which they're not. So let's say they need 30 seats. They're all Labor seats, right? They have to win Labor voters. The only way the coalition gets back to government is by winning Labor
That's why
voters.
Tony Abbott has to run in Western Sydney for McMahon.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that plays out. But, yeah, I mean, they've got to make the argument on it. I just don't know whether they're up to it, whether they will, whether they're too divided.
Well, and this was the point that we have been talking about, and some of the thoughtful Liberal MPs talked about the fact that when Peter Dutton came out against The Voice, a majority of Australians supported The Voice, which they did, and the argument was that it was the Liberal Party that won the debate on The Voice, and my argument is it wasn't the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party, by and large, didn't campaign against The Voice. It was Jacinda Nampijinpa-Price, it was Warren Mundine, it was Advance, and the Liberal Party haven't had a history of actually fighting for anything hard for a long time. And again, we've seen, so Susan Lee did 30-odd media interviews on net zero and talking about affordable energy. Great. Where was everyone else?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on The Voice, there were a lot of individual Liberal MPs.
There were
who campaigned hard.
There were, yeah, and there were some...
and Nationals MPs.
That's right, and there were some Liberal MPs who campaigned hard for yes.
Yeah, not as many though. Hi, thanks for watching the new podcast with John and myself. Hey, did you know that about 70% of those who watch this podcast are not yet subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? Do us a favour, hit subscribe, and that way you won't miss any of the action. And while you're at it, click the link on the screen to go to the Institute of Public Affairs website where you can sign up for the latest news and research from the IPA. Now, back to the chat.
So I think the Liberals have a long way to go, and they're going to need more issues than just net zero to come anywhere close to the Albanese government, because they do have an issue that is going to take effect in the next 2 weeks, which they need to reverse their position on, like they did on net zero, like they did on misinformation, and then they're going to get the future vote of every 14, 15 and 16-year-old, Dan.
Do you reckon?
Yeah. This social media ban that comes in on December 10, which was invented in a couple of days as a moral panic by Jonathan Haidt, the Labor Party and the mainstream legacy media, who were afraid of losing traffic to social media. This plan is going to come into effect on December 10. No one has any idea how it is going to work. The government itself is already backing down. The Communications Minister, Annika Wells, said this, and this is a great quote, and the great James McPherson pointed this out to me. So this is how the Labor Party makes laws. We know this law will not be perfect, but it is too important not to have a crack. So rather than testing out a law, rather than trialling it, rather than being careful and moderate in its implementation, we have a social media ban that is absolutely wrong in principle, because it's something that should be left to parents. not too big government. And we are already seeing that similar plans overseas are not working. So in the UK, for example, they've instituted verification on websites, for example, dating websites. You have to demonstrate that you're over 18 to the platform. There was a dating website that was operating in the UK. A third-party operator collected the information to demonstrate and prove that the users were over 18. There was a leak, a hack. 72,000 private records were leaked. And this is a policy that is still supported by the coalition. The only people who spoke against it were the Greens and One Nation.
There were some individuals within the party. Alex Antic voted against it in the Senate. There may have been others too.
But
as a party.
But as a party, it was way through shadow cabinet. Peter Dutton supported it. And then you've got the bigger question of where does as again, we've talked about many times, where does the Liberal Party stand on freedom of speech? You've got an e-safety commissioner that is out of control. We've got our friends at the Free Speech Union pointing out that many of the activities of the e-safety commissioner have got absolutely no basis in legislation. And the mainstream parties are absolutely silent about this.
With the social media ban, though, would you support it if it didn't have those issues? Because your
No.
issue, so your issue isn't so much with that.
Yeah, no.
The practicalities. Your issue is different.
Yeah, my issue is practically it won't work, but it is fundamentally wrong in principle. This is a decision for parents. And at a practical level. And again, even the ABC has been covering things like marginalised young people in difficult family circumstances. All they have is social media, and you have a half-baked policy that is going to be a disaster, and that just frames so much of what this government's doing.
But what about the argument that parents can only control a locus of what their children do or see? So as they get older, parents have less influence over their children. So you might at home say, you can't use social media. I don't want you to have a social media account. But then what happens when they're with their friends and you don't have control over that?
And the government shouldn't have control either.
But the argument is that there's... I'm not as opposed to this as you are, because I think there is an argument. Well, I have two things here. The main reason I don't support it is because we know a part of the reason for it is to deprive younger people of access to information that's counter to the narrative. That's the reason I don't like it, because there's a lot of 14 and 15-year-olds who avail themselves of a variety of content, a lot of which I don't agree with, but a lot of which I do agree with. And rather than them being dependent on a failing school system on the mainstream media, they can at least have the opportunity to find other things. So if you're someone who's sitting there in class and you're like, I don't agree with what the teacher's saying, at least you can go find something different. So that's why
I can go and watch Charlie Kirk videos.
They can, as an example. So that's the main reason I don't like it. But I'm not completely opposed to the idea in the sense of parents can only control so much. But the thing that it's never been explained to me by MPs is, if your concern is information that children are accessing, and you believe that's causing harm,
and bullying is the other,
and fair enough,
right?
Is
the other.
But there's far worse things on the internet than social media, and my point is that it's those other things that are more harmful, like the violent and obscene content, that as a parent you can't stop your children accessing, and that they're not able to contextualise appropriately. That's a far bigger problem.
You mean 3-year-olds being asked what gender they are?
Well, that's a part of it, but there's other things on the internet that are far worse. So why is it that the focus has only been on social media rather than other things that are far worse?
Yeah, because the mainstream legacy media sees social media as a threat, and the mainstream legacy media has in fact congratulated itself for being the apparatus that has pushed this ban.
And that would have some currency if the mainstream media actually was an institution that held power to account, which it doesn't. The mainstream media has fallen behind governments with, where we've just been talking about in the office here, the book that we're putting out on Daniel Andrews and his legacy. And it reminded me how every single major media organisations supported Daniel Andrews, supported the lockdown, supported the mandates. Yes, there were a couple of individuals
within those organisations, but as a whole,
Adam Crichton, who works at the IPA, some individuals
Peter Credlin was
at
very
Sky
good.
News.
Yep.
But by and large, the institutions of the media fell in behind Daniel Andrews. They fell in behind net zero. You know, News Corp did the big thing backing Scott Morrison on net zero. They support, you know, all these policies. So they don't have any
on lockdowns. Let me
all of it.
Think. Yeah.
Lockdowns, mandates, supported. So all the media supported all of it. So they don't have any credibility as being, you know, if they were actually doing their job and having, you know, an impartial and a range of views.
They had it all authority all the time, but they don't.
Yeah. So that's the issue. But I think one of the downsides to me of the narrow focus on social media is I believe that smartphones are a very bad thing for young people to have. So I wouldn't be opposed to just saying if you're under 16, you can't have a smartphone, for example. Because I think that's where the problems are. I don't think there's any reason for someone of that age to have a smartphone, is my opinion. But it becomes reduced to this argument about you're not allowed to have a social media account on Facebook or Instagram. So it's a classic example of how Australia struggles to have proper debates with big issues. It just gets reduced to a very small, and admittedly important for some people. If you've been bullied systemically on social media, I completely understand the impact that has. But there's a far bigger debate to be had here about technology and younger people.
Yeah, there isn't any debate.
And we haven't had any debate.
I believe there isn't a debate to be had.
Right, you're cool.
It's a debate, or it's a discussion for parents, for social institutions. I don't think this is a role for government. This is a classic example of we have a problem and a challenge, which we absolutely do. And anyone with young children or children that have a smart device knows exactly the challenge that we face. But this is not the role for Annika Wells and Anthony Albanese to be telling me how to bring up my kids. And if the coalition, if the centre-right of politics stands for anything, it is get the government out of my living room, out of my classroom. Sadly, they are in it, and that's a separate discussion. And let me bring up children, my children, the way I think is appropriate.
But a lot of parents struggle with it. A lot of parents...
Yeah, they absolutely do.
But a lot of parents ask for it.
Well, then... No, but I don't accept the argument that because some parents ask for the government to take away their child rearing responsibilities, that therefore all parents have to be impacted by that.
I don't think there's no role for government in this at all. I just don't.
There might be, but I struggle to see one.
No, fair enough. I wanted to talk about an article that you shared with me a day or two ago about something about Yimbies versus NIMBYs. So Yimbies are people, yes, in my backyard. So these are people who want to have more development, housing development and so forth.
14-storey multi-block units in suburban streets.
Yeah. And NIMBYs, which has become a term of derision, which is not in my backyard. And you know what the debate is, which is, all the problem about why, the number one reason why housing is not affordable in Australia is because of NIMBYs.
Because there's not enough units.
There's not enough,
in Australian suburbs.
Yeah. So there's an article you shared from Substack called Commonplace, and one of the authors is Oren Cass, who was, I think he was an advisor to Mitt Romney back in the day, and he runs a few different, I think it's American Compass is the, I guess, think tank that
and one of the leading American conservative thinkers at the moment.
Yeah, American Compass, and someone who is interesting, thinks about things deeply, has interesting things to say, doesn't just shoot from the hip, but has a lot of interesting perspectives on these issues. And, he makes the very good point that according to some surveys that had been commissioned, one was from an organisation called Institute for Family Studies, when they asked a question of respondents to visualise their ideal home, nearly 80% of respondents wanted a detached single-family house.
Don't they want a unit? Don't they want a flat?
20%. 20% want that. So 80% want an actual house to live in.
But this is exactly the same figures that apply to Australia.
Is that right? Yeah. So people want to live in houses. Who would have thought that?
They want to live in suburbs.
Yeah.
They want to play cricket in the street. And they want to run around under the garden hose in the afternoon in their backyard.
Yeah. And so, again, we're talking about how Australia struggles to have proper debates. It gets reduced to ridiculing people who actually want to have a say.
No, but you're just supporting the government. The government wants us to live in apartments and units. Are you saying that now we can have a say as to where we live? We don't have a say as to how we bring up our kids, but we do have a say as to whether we can live in suburbs.
No, I'm not quite sure I said that, John, but what I would say is there's no real debate about this. So it gets reduced to this idea that
you're selfish. You don't want to have multi-story apartments.
Why can't people? I'm not saying people should have a veto power over every development that happens in their street, but why can't they have a say in a meaningful say, not just, here's a consultation process, put in a submission that we're going to ignore. But if there's a critical mass of people that don't want something, shouldn't, in a democracy, that actually count for something?
Oh, so you're saying that multinational power companies don't get the right to just trample over someone's farm and put in a high voltage
which is what's happening,
wire across their pastures?
Which is what's happening in Victoria.
But this goes to the ideological conflict, which again the centre-right in Australia has shied away from, and unfortunately too many on the centre-right have fallen in for this NIMBY argument. People want to live in detached houses. They want to live in suburbs. Suburbia is good. It's been, as you said, it's been demonised. And again, we've seen the data both in Australia and overseas that birth rates decline as people live in more congested environments. And this is a clear example of the politicians, the policymakers, the experts, not just not listening to what people want, but forcing a way of life on people that is not what they would accept.
I think the only counter argument is that you can only have so much sprawl. So the kind of sprawl.
What does that mean? You can only have so much sprawl.
Well,
you can have you can have another city.
Yeah, but that's something that.
Well, what does so much sprawl mean? What is? You're now upsetting
I'm just playing devil's.
No, sprawl.
Well, if you let me finish what I'm saying.
What's sprawl?
If you let me finish.
Sprawl is suburbs with backyards.
Yeah. But the argument that these people will say is that you can't replicate what we used to have. Because when you had the original sort of suburbanisation in the post-World War II era, there was a lot of land unused that were near the cities. And now you have people living 2 hours out of town. So that's the other argument.
No, I don't. I mean, Australia has one of, while our cities are dense in terms of our land use for urban purposes, it's amongst the lowest in the world. There is no shortage of land in Australia. The idea that there has to be a central business district that people move in and out of on a daily basis, I think is misconceived. There is absolutely...
But that's all we have. Isn't that the problem?
Yeah, but you can change. I mean, you can build new cities, you can develop new areas. This idea that you have, if we're all going to be working from home or we have a guaranteed right to work from home, then the idea that we are going to have to be driving to work or taking public transport for an hour or longer each way to get to work, I don't think applies. I think it's very narrow thinking to impose a way of life on people that Australians don't want. I mean, they'd have us all cycling to work.
Unfortunately, we don't have a good track record as a country of building cities. I think Albury was a design.
We like Albury.
We like Albury, yeah, but other than that, because there was the Whitlam idea.
Yeah,
and I think.
And was it wrong?
The idea was right, but I looked this up the other day. One of them, I hope I don't get this wrong. One of them was not in Adelaide, but a couple of hours out, I think Monarto, the Monarto, where there's a zoo there, and that was going to be it's quite a good zoo. It's like a wildlife zoo, but it was going to be one of the cities, and there's like a couple hundred people that live there now. So, not successful in its application. So we haven't succeeded in doing it.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't try again.
You can try, but I guess places like Parramatta, you sort of have the two CBD idea. So Parramatta's kind of become a second CBD, which potentially can work.
And
so if you live in Penrith, you can.
Yeah, Melbourne has Geelong.
Melbourne has Geelong, yeah. So, but people typically go one way. They go Geelong to Melbourne, whereas in Sydney, you can have people that live in Penrith and go to Parramatta rather than going to the CBD, which can potentially.
But as you said, this is a debate that we don't have, because if you don't want a high-rise building in your street, then you're an NIMBY. And you're selfish.
And most people don't want it.
No, they don't.
No. Sorry.
That's why they get it.
Yes. Yeah. No, fancy that. You've got an interesting book to talk about this week, John. What's your favourite segment?
after what's on in Adelaide this week segment. No, so Christmas is coming up, and I would recommend to viewers and listeners get onto the website of our friends at Connor Court Publishing. There's a fantastic array of books. As you mentioned, Morgan Beggs from the IPA, his new book on the Andrews government will be out. There's the Frank Knoffelmarker papers that we've talked about. There's a new edition of Gerard Henderson's book on the George Pell trial that's just come out. And over the last last few days, Dan, I've just been reading something that's just come out from Connor Court, In Search of John Christian Watson, Labor's First Prime Minister, by Michael Easson, and it's part of a series that Connor Court is running on Prime Ministers, and it's a wonderful work. So Michael Easson, a former New South Wales trade union leader, a thoughtful, perceptive person and writer, and he has done this monograph on Australia's third Prime Minister, and Watson was only Prime Minister for about 3 months, and the story of his government isn't as interesting as what happened to him after he finished as Labor leader and as Labor Prime Minister. So he was Prime Minister at the age of 37, so youngest ever Prime Minister. But for me, what I found really interesting was the discussion that Michael Easson does brilliantly about Watson's role in the conscription debates of the First World War. So as a Labor leader, he was a powerful voice for conscription in support of Billy Hughes. Of course, it split the Labor Party. He was expelled from the Labor Party for supporting conscription, and there was such an interesting discussion that Easson goes through between the arguments of those for conscription, saying that the empire was at stake, that they had a responsibility to the people whose lives had already been sacrificed to continue the fight, and those who said, as a matter of moral principle, no, we can't conscript people either to fight Australia's wars or to fight other countries' wars. And for me, as we've spoken about, I think the two conscription referenda of 16 and 17, technically they were plebiscites, for me is up there with the Voice as one of the times when Australians came to debate big philosophical principled issues, and I would have voted no to conscription, as Australians narrowly did. The Communist Party referendum, when Menzies tried to ban the Communist Party, was another one of those examples where big issues were at stake. And it's as I said, a wonderful short history about someone who's they might know his name, but they won't know a lot about John Christian Watson. And it's also a story about when the Labor Party used to support workers. And it wasn't taken over by a professional elite who disdained people who worked with their hands.
Yeah, the conscription debates and the plebiscites are a pretty fascinating part of our history. So the first one in 1916 was, as you say, narrowly defeated. So it was 51.6, 48.4 on a nationwide basis, and the states were split. So New South Wales, Queensland, and South Australia voted against, and Victoria, WA, and Tasmania voted in favour of it. Actually, WA was almost 70%.
And that
in favour.
And that was also because WA had a higher proportion of Protestant British migrants, and again, the overlay of the referendum debates, a little bit like the Voice debate in a different context. There were different themes. There was the Catholic Protestant theme. There was the worker capitalist theme. Many farmers and those in rural areas were against conscription for fear of losing workers. Then you had a very big female-male divide as well. And again, as Michael Easson talks about, the split in the Labor Party, the antagonisms and the hostility that the conscription debate raised lasted for for decades, and I think that's one of the things that fortunately hasn't happened with The Voice in a way that occurred in 1916 and 1917.
One of the things about Billy Hughes that whether you like him or not,
there's not much to like.
Well, he kept going though. He did it again.
Yeah.
I really respect the fact that he goes, I'll do it
And he
again.
goes on in Parliament, and he was such a nuisance to Menzies, but he just wouldn't go away.
And he was in, 3 or 4 different parties?
Yep.
Or he ran 3 or 4 different parties. So then they had another one in 1917, which lost by a bit more, 54 to 46. So... Why do you know if there was much difference between why did he go again? Do you know he just wanted to get it done, or was there? Was the argument that we can end the war if we can?
No. The argument was in both 16 and 17, especially in 17, that Australia would have a bigger say in the peace settlement. If Australia was demonstrating a commitment to conscription. The other thing about, there's so many aspects to conscription, but unlike New Zealand, unlike the UK that had conscription, Australia didn't, and of course we put it to a vote. And this is one of the really special things about referenda, and I think we should have more referendums on more things. But whether it's banning the Communist Party, conscription, The Voice, even the Republic, that when you put these big questions to the public, I think invariably the public get the answer right, but more importantly, it builds trust. It builds democracy, and we were just talking about immigration. And if you're an average voter in Australia today on climate change, on immigration, on housing, you feel the decisions are removed from you, you don't have a say. And what was significant about 1916 and 1917 is that, as I said, for all the hostility they arose, people did feel empowered. And I think that was important, and that was also important just 16, 17 years after Federation, as the political economy of Australia was developing. Unfortunately, the experiences of 16 and 17 basically, I think, then had a number of politicians saying, these big questions, we can't put them to the people. We can't trust the people. And interestingly, there's a debate. The federal government probably could have introduced conscription anyway without the plebiscites. The plebiscites were only, they weren't, of course, to change the constitution. So even though they called at the time referenda, they weren't referendum, they were just plebiscites. They were expressions of people's will, like in the same-sex marriage debate. But the government didn't need these plebiscites to enforce conscription, but such was the democratic impulse that the government thought they needed to.
But they could, am I right to say they could conscript people
to defend Australia? Yes.
And they were asking whether we could do that for external.
Correct.
And I basically agree with that. I mean, I would vote, it's impossible to know what you would have done at that time, but if it was held now, I would vote no to conscripting people for a foreign battle. But I think that there are existential, when you're under attack, where conscription is probably necessary. That's where I would probably land on it.
Yeah, I think if you have to conscript people to defend your country, then you have a bigger problem than conscription itself.
Yeah. That's probably a fair point. But you are right about, I think, having... And the other thing about these plebiscites is they happened during the war.
Yeah.
So, and even if you lost, at least you got to have your say. So you're more likely to support the outcome.
Except, the same-sex marriage debate.
Yeah,
it was broadly accepted. People had a chance to argue it out, and they won or they lost.
Yeah, fancy that. People actually having a say in what happens in their country.
But, we've just mentioned my, fourth, fifth favourite topic. Lockdowns here in Victoria, during lockdowns, Parliament was suspended. We forget that we've had referenda, we've had elections, we've had all manner of things during world wars. Parliament, in London, in the Second World War, Parliament was sitting while the city was getting bombed.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, shut down everything.
Yeah, no Parliament.
No Parliament, no legislative oversight of anything that the government was doing, which is why Morgan, I can't wait for us to be talking about in the future episodes, Morgan Begg's fantastic book on the government.
It's out on the 3rd of December, so we'll be able to talk about that next time.
A fantastic Christmas present. to cheer
Well,
you up.
too depressing.
Imagine giving to your family on Christmas Day, or in our family because we're European, Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas. I love you very much. Here's a book on Dan Andrews.
Yeah, I'll take the coal, thanks. I'll take the lump of coal in the sock. So
maybe you'll realise how lucky you are that he's now gone.
Yeah, yep. Cool. All right, John, we'll leave it there.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.